She vanished in a crowd of thousands, and no one knew why. That night, Morgan Harrington wore her favorite Pantera t-shirt, holding a ticket to the Metallica concert she'd been looking forward to for weeks. The stadium at the University of Virginia was packed. Electric guitars tore through the air. Lights swept across the stands in blinding waves. In a few fleeting seconds, Morgan stepped outside and never came back. No screams. No cameras. No one could remember the moment she disappeared. 3 months later, her body was found in an empty field nearly 10 miles away. Broken bones. Left behind. No explanation. But it's what wasn't found that haunted her family for more than a decade. How could a 20-year-old woman in the heart of a crowded college town be swept away like she was never there at all? Someone knows. Someone saw. But silence. Silence has always been the most enduring killer. And this case, it was never truly closed. Morgan Dana Harrington was born in 1989 in Roanoke, Virginia, a small city where everyone knew each other, or at least knew the name, the Harringtons. Both of her parents were professors. She grew up in a home filled with books, cats, and dinner table conversations that danced between laughter and debate. Morgan wasn't your typical girl. She loved rock music, wrote in her journal nearly every day, and once said, "If I ever go missing, people will know where to find me. At the record store or the library." She had bright eyes, flowing blonde hair, and a quiet kind of confidence. The kind that made you feel safe just sitting next to her. Her friends described her as having an old soul, like she wasn't meant for this era. Morgan studied education. She wanted to become a teacher, but not just any teacher. She dreamed of teaching the kids no one else wanted to teach. Her college town was a different world entirely. Charlottesville, Virginia. Lively, crowded, but sometimes cold and easy to get lost in. In that world, Morgan was calm in the chaos. The kind of person who walked into a room and softened the air around her. Her boyfriend once said she had a habit of staying after class just to pick up the scraps of paper left behind. She cared about the smallest things, the things most people ignored, he said. On the night of October 17th, 2009, Morgan was getting ready for the Metallica concert at John Paul Jones Arena. It wasn't just a show. It was her dream. At 5:30 p.m., she texted her boyfriend, "I'm gonna scream my lungs out. If I don't text you tomorrow, I probably lost my voice." No one knew. That would be the last message she'd ever send. Morgan arrived at the concert with 3 close friends. They laughed, took selfies, and posted pictures on Facebook standing in the middle of a roaring crowd. But there was something even her closest friends didn't know about Morgan. She once snuck out of a concert early, just to help a stranger who had collapsed on the sidewalk. Morgan had this instinct to move toward people in need, her mother said, even if it meant losing her way. And that night, that same instinct may have pulled her out of the crowd and into a space no one ever came back from. A space that, for 3 long months, was filled only with theories and not a single solid clue. Big questions began to form in the minds of those who loved her. Was someone watching Morgan that night? Or did something happen outside the arena that she never got the chance to tell anyone about? Morgan and 3 friends arrived at the John Paul Jones Arena around 6:00 p.m. The Metallica concert, one of the most anticipated shows of that fall, was already shaking the foundations of Charlottesville. More than 15,000 people packed the venue. The thunder of guitars ricocheted off the steel frame of the arena, and lights flashed across the crowd in waves of red and gold. Morgan stood in the middle of it all, smiling, radiant, hands in the air, moving with the music. She loved rock. But more than that, she loved the feeling of belonging, being part of a community that pulsed with energy. Around 8:30 p.m., she told her friends she was heading to the restroom, but she never came back. And the first strange detail wasn't that she disappeared, it was that she wasn't allowed to return. The arena had a strict no re-entry policy. Once you stepped outside, you weren't getting back in, no exceptions. At 8:48 p.m., Morgan texted her friend, "I'm locked out. Don't wait for me. I'll find a way home." Her friends thought it was just a small hiccup. They stayed to enjoy the rest of the show. But after that message, Morgan never texted again. A witness later reported seeing a girl matching Morgan's description near the Copley Bridge, a few hundred yards from the arena. She appeared to be hitchhiking. It was around 9:30 p.m. The air had turned cold. Black Pantera t-shirt, blonde hair tousled by the wind. Everything matched. But no one was certain. The first truly alarming moment came at 11:30 p.m. Morgan's parents received a call. She hadn't come home. No one could reach her. And her phone, when later recovered, had the battery removed. The next morning, her friends went back to the arena to look for clues. What they found chilled them to the bone. Morgan's phone, her wallet, her ID, all found in the RV lot behind the stadium, near the rear parking area, placed close together, as if someone had arranged them intentionally. The police were notified immediately, but instead of launching a full-scale search, they suggested Morgan might have left on her own. To some, she was just another 20-year-old who partied too hard and wandered off. To her family, this was the start of a nightmare. The next day, Charlottesville fell under a quiet kind of fog. No citywide alert, no breaking news, just a one-line statement from local police. Missing female student possibly left voluntarily. But Morgan's parents, Dan and Gil Harrington, didn't believe that. She would never leave without telling us, her mother said during her first emotional interview. Morgan had planned her entire week. Classes, assignment deadlines, and a scheduled volunteer shift with a community education group. Within 48 hours, the family filed an official missing persons report and demanded a full investigation. And that's when the details started unraveling. And none of them made sense. Another witness came forward. They claimed to have seen Morgan near a remote parking area, nearly a mile from the arena. She was standing close to a group of men, at least 3. There seemed to be tension, maybe even an argument. No one could say for sure. It was dark, the streetlights were dim, but the account added fuel to a chilling theory. Someone had approached her. Surrounding surveillance cameras were reviewed. The results? No clear footage of Morgan's last movements. Several cameras weren't working. Others were obscured. Some just weren't operational that night. Volunteers, university friends, and online communities began to mobilize. Flyers were posted at cafes, post offices, gas stations. The hashtag #FindMorgan began to spread, but only locally. There was no national media frenzy, no primetime coverage like other missing persons cases. Morgan wasn't famous. She was just a college student on an ordinary night who vanished without a trace. And then, on the 10th day, something shifted. A farmer living 10 miles outside of town reported something odd on his land. The soil looked disturbed, like someone had tried to dig or hide something. Police searched the area. They didn't find Morgan, but they found something else. A black Pantera t-shirt, ripped, dirty, lying beneath a bush. The same kind of shirt Morgan was wearing that night. DNA tests confirmed it was hers, but there was no blood, no tissue, no drag marks, no signs of struggle. It was as if someone had placed the shirt there, just enough to be found, but never enough to be followed. The case, once seen as a voluntary walk-off, had now morphed into a chilling mystery. And the worst part, Morgan was still missing. As media attention slowly grew, people began to notice something strange. There were 3 conflicting witness accounts of what Morgan did after being locked out of the arena. A security guard said she seemed calm, not worried at all. Another, a vendor at a water kiosk, claimed Morgan was crying and looked panicked. And a third person, passing through the parking lot, said she stood completely still, as if waiting for someone. 3 stories, 3 emotions. Same timeline. So which one was true? Morgan's parents began to question the way police were handling the case. Why wasn't there any surveillance footage tracing her steps? Why did it take over a week to identify her shirt? Why did law enforcement dismiss the possibility of abduction so quickly? Then, a leak came from inside the investigation. A taxi driver reportedly told someone that he had picked up a girl resembling Morgan on the night of October 17th, nearly 3 miles from the stadium. The woman didn't speak, she just stared out the window. She didn't respond when asked where she was going, but when police followed up, the driver backtracked. He wasn't sure if it was Morgan. At the same time, Reddit users began digging. Some claimed they'd seen Morgan post in underground rock music groups on Facebook, spaces where strangers often looked for concert buddies. One account in particular, username JPMFan1983, allegedly messaged Morgan a few weeks before she vanished. The account disappeared the moment her case hit the news. Police couldn't trace it. It wasn't tied to a real phone number. Another lead, lost to the void. And then Morgan's close friends came forward with something they hadn't thought much of before. In the week leading up to the concert, Morgan had seemed uneasy. She once asked, "If you feel like someone's following you but you can't prove it, does that make you paranoid?" Her friend thought she was just stressed about finals. But now, that question haunted them. Was someone watching Morgan? And if so, had it already begun before that night? As the news cycle moved on, the Harrington family refused to fade into silence. They launched their own media campaign, school talks, interviews, public awareness drives. And most importantly, they hired a private investigator. His name was Alan Hicks, a retired officer with 30 years of experience in kidnapping cases from New Jersey. And Hicks started with one question. If Morgan was taken from a crowd, why didn't anyone see? Unless no one was really looking. Hicks didn't believe in coincidences. He canvassed the neighborhoods near the arena, where local shops and homes had personal security cameras. And then he found something that stunned the entire investigation team. One particular camera, which might have captured Morgan walking past that night, had a gap in its data. The footage was missing from exactly 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. The store owner claimed it was a software glitch, but everything else from that week, completely intact. Only that night, the night Morgan disappeared, had gone dark. Hicks called it a manufactured blind spot, because that kind of coincidence just didn't feel real. There was something else. The route from the arena to the RV lot, where Morgan's belongings were later found, passed through a secluded zone. According to an internal police memo never released to the public, that area was known to be a late-night gathering spot for underground activity, drug deals, illegal trades, a place you didn't want to end up alone. A local resident, Ella Trenton, age 58, lived nearby. She told Hicks that on the night of October 17th, she saw something strange. A black SUV parked behind the arena. It was close to 10 p.m. I'd stepped out to get my cat, she recalled. The headlights turned on, then off again, like someone was waiting. As she approached, the SUV roared to life and drove off. She didn't catch the license plate, but she was sure someone was sitting in the back seat. The strangest part? No one had ever asked her about it, not until Hicks knocked on her door. At this point, the idea of a random disappearance began to unravel. Questions that once felt far-fetched started to sound plausible. Did someone intentionally lure Morgan away from the concert? Was there a small plan, carefully layered beneath scattered, broken details? One of Morgan's friends once said, she always knew when someone was watching her. But maybe that night, she didn't notice soon enough. And by then, only one thing was clear. There were clues. There had always been clues, but they were buried in shadows, waiting for someone with enough patience to see them. September 2014, nearly 5 years after Morgan vanished, another case shook Charlottesville. An 18-year-old student named Hannah Graham, also from the University of Virginia, went missing just days after attending an off-campus party. It felt like history repeating itself. A young woman, late at night, a college town that once felt safe, and then she was gone. This time, the investigation captured national headlines. Police presence was ramped up. Surveillance footage was pulled from everywhere. And then a name surfaced. Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr. He worked at a local hospital. He had a prior history involving sexual assault allegations, but had never been convicted. Not enough evidence, not enough attention. But there he was, captured on video walking with Hannah the night she disappeared. The footage showed him leaving a bar with her, his arm around her shoulders, guiding her into the dark. Jesse was immediately named a suspect. But by the time police arrived at his workplace, he was gone. 3 days later, he was found, camping alone in the woods of Texas. In his vehicle, police discovered strands of hair, fibers, and DNA, all matching Hannah. But what came next, no one saw coming. DNA recovered from the Pantera t-shirt in Morgan Harrington's case, the one found years earlier, was a direct match to Jesse Matthew. A chill swept through the Harrington family. The evidence had been there all along, and yet it took another young woman disappearing to unlock what should have been seen years ago. Police dug deeper. They matched Jesse's DNA to another case, a 2005 assault in Fairfax, Virginia. The victim survived, but the attacker had never been caught. DNA from that case, also Jesse. This wasn't a one-time suspect. This was a pattern, a ghost who'd slipped through the cracks for years, leaving victims in his wake. Morgan's family didn't cry when they got the call. They just sat in silence. At that moment, we didn't know whether to feel relief or twice the heartbreak, her mother said. Because the cruelest truth was this. If Jesse had been stopped sooner, Morgan might still be alive. When Jesse Matthew Jr. was officially named the suspect, in both Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham's cases, many in Charlottesville weren't surprised. They remembered Jesse, tall, charismatic, once a football player for UVA. He wasn't invisible. He had been among us. And then the question began to rise. If Jesse had been suspected in a 2005 assault, why was he never prosecuted? The answer was a series of missed chances. In 2002, Jesse was investigated for harassment at a community college, but the school handled it internally. No charges. In 2003, he transferred. Months later, another female student reported a sexual assault. Again, no prosecution. No physical evidence, he said. She said. Then in 2005, Fairfax. The victim was attacked from behind, knocked unconscious, raped, and left in the woods. She survived, and left behind the attacker's DNA. But at the time, forensic tools weren't advanced enough. And Jesse's DNA wasn't in the system, because he'd never been convicted of anything. A perfect loophole. Jesse slipped through the fingers of a system that never squeezed tight enough. Even worse, whispers began to emerge. That a few officers had quietly suspected Jesse in other minor incidents. But without pressure, those reports simply sat in drawers. No one followed through. No one wanted to chase a shadow that moved too quietly. When Morgan's family learned the full timeline, they felt betrayed. Not just by the man who killed our daughter, her father said, but by the people who were supposed to protect her. And so the question was no longer, who killed Morgan? But who allowed him to keep going? Because justice, when it comes too late, is no longer comfort. It's a tolling bell over an open grave. And Morgan was not the only victim. When Jesse Matthew was arrested, it felt like Charlottesville exhaled. A dangerous predator had finally been brought into the light. But in the shadow of that relief, some people couldn't stop asking questions. Certain things didn't add up. First, the timeline. Morgan was believed to have disappeared between 8:48 and 9:30 p.m. But an internal report, later leaked, showed Jesse's phone pinged from a location nearly 20 minutes away during that exact window. A data error? Or was Jesse never actually near the arena? Then there was the pattern. The 2005 assault. Hannah Graham. Both involved direct contact, rapid escalation, and a quick discovery of the victim. But Morgan? Morgan was lured. Gone for months. Her body hidden in a rural field. No witnesses. No sign. It felt different. Colder. More calculated. Even the place where Morgan's body was found raised new doubts. Anchorage Farm. A remote property with no security cameras, no regular traffic, and only one entrance. A locked iron gate. So who brought her there? And why did it take 3 months to find her? That's when private investigator Alan Hicks started asking a new kind of question. What if Jesse Matthew didn't act alone? Or worse, what if Jesse wasn't the main killer at all? While reviewing witness accounts, Hicks found something that had been overlooked. A woman named Clara, who worked near the RV lot, reported seeing a white man around 30 wearing a baseball cap, standing close to Morgan that night. They looked familiar with each other, and he wasn't Jesse. Police documented the statement, but never released it publicly. A theory began to form. Maybe Jesse had contact, maybe even left behind DNA, but he wasn't the one who abducted Morgan. Or someone used Jesse as the perfect shield to hide a far more elaborate plan. Jesse's name might have been the ending, or just the beginning of something far more disturbing. As the public accepted that Morgan's case was solved, the unanswered details started to unravel that illusion, like pulling back a curtain and finding another door behind it. The first red flag for online investigators was Anchorage Farm itself. The location was miles from the city center, surrounded by light forest, with a single dirt road leading in. The property owner, a former military man, was said to have close ties with local officials. When Hicks tried to access land records and guest logs from the time of Morgan's disappearance, he was denied access. Privacy reasons, they said. So, if Jesse didn't know this area well, who brought him there? And if he didn't go willingly, who helped? Then came the forensic inconsistencies. Morgan's body, when finally recovered, showed advanced decomposition, beyond what experts expected for that time of year. One specialist quietly questioned whether she had been kept elsewhere before being placed at Anchorage Farm. That report was never made public. The Harrington family only heard of it because it was accidentally forwarded in an email to a volunteer from the search team. And then there was the ring. Morgan always wore a silver ring, a birthday gift from her mother. It wasn't found with her remains. It wasn't mentioned in the police inventory. But 3 months later, a woman running a secondhand shop in another county posted a ring for sale on eBay. It looked identical. When the Harringtons reached out, the account vanished. The IP address traced back to a short-term motel in a different town. No hard proof, just one more blurred edge, in a case full of them. The truth seemed to live in the space between what was known and what was never meant to be spoken. Morgan deserved to be remembered as a person, not just a file marked closed. But it felt like there were people in places of power, who wanted her story to end with Jesse. Simple, tidy, file it away. But the truth? The truth is never tidy. And in the shadows of this case, someone may still be smiling, because they know everyone else has stopped looking. Nearly 15 years have passed since Morgan Harrington disappeared into a sea of music, lights, and strangers. A night that should have been a cherished memory became a void no one dares to speak of. Her family still lives in Virginia. They've kept her bedroom untouched. The Metallica poster still on the wall, as if Morgan had simply gone somewhere and might walk through the door at any moment. In interview after interview, her parents never once called Jesse Matthew the man who killed our daughter. They said, "We're not searching for a monster, we're searching for the truth." And that truth seems to have been scattered, broken, swallowed by the very system sworn to protect it. Morgan wasn't the first girl to vanish without a scream being heard. And tragically, she won't be the last. There are still pieces left untouched. Witnesses whose voices never made it into court. Security cameras that conveniently malfunctioned at the most critical moments. And somewhere out there, there's still a ring, a simple silver ring, a birthday gift from a mother, still drifting, like a whisper that we don't yet know the full story. Justice doesn't always come in the shape of a verdict. Sometimes it arrives as a memory, a quiet ache that refuses to let us forget. And Morgan, though gone, still lives in the searching eyes of her mother, the aching voice of her father, and in you, the person still listening to her story, even now. Because if we let silence win, who will be the next to disappear into the dark without anyone turning back